Hi there. It's January the 28th and we're continuing our journey through Matthew's Gospel, and we're going today from chapter 18 verse 21 through to chapter 19 verse 12. There are two main themes in this reading. The first one is to do with forgiveness. Peter comes to Jesus and says, how many times do I have to forgive a brother? Perhaps he thought 7 times was very reasonable and very righteous, but Jesus actually turns that on its head and he goes back to him and he says, actually, it's 77 times. In other words, until you lose count, don't even keep count. Because forgiveness is not just a question of my righteousness and my doing the right thing, but forgiveness actually enables peace and healing and reconciliation, which is the top of Jesus' agenda. And when we hold others in unforgiveness, we actually hold ourselves in a place of bondage. Someone once said that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The people who suffer most are ourselves. So Jesus is encouraging us to let go. Not to say that everything that's been done to us is good and okay, but just like God, who has been sinned against and has harmed, is willing to forgive all kinds of evil, then we should also mirror his example. In fact, Jesus then goes on to tell this parable of the man who owes a huge amount to the ruler, a vast amount, the amount that could never be repaid, and the ruler remits it to him. He writes off his debt, but then that man who's had his debts written off goes to a fellow slave actually and demands a smaller amount, an amount that even though he can't pay, he puts him in a prison. So the ruler is angry with the man who will not forgive and will not release. And actually this comes out in Jesus' prayer, of course, forgive us today as we forgive those who sin against us, who owe us, who are in debt to us. And there's something very powerful here about Jesus' lesson of forgiveness. Another powerful lesson comes out at the beginning of chapter 19 when the disciples are asking, or rather the Pharisees are asking Jesus about marriage and about divorce. And they say, is it right to divorce? Now Jesus actually says, yes, the Torah allows there to be a bill of divorce and people break up, but this is not how God originally intended it. This is not how marriage was designed at the beginning. And Jesus quotes from the very early chapters of Bereshit, of Genesis. He goes right back to the beginning. He says, when God designed man, he designed him male and female, designed humans male and female, because they need one another. Male and female need one another in coming together to re-image the nature and the character of God. There's something in man, there's something in woman which is not in the other, and God has invested that in. But when they come back together, they not only come together spiritually, Jesus says, but also they become one flesh. Now that's a very interesting concept, because often we think of this one flesh thing as being very spiritual and very emotional and very loving. But actually, when Jesus is talking about it, the one flesh, the word used in the Greek, of course, means one flesh being. And there's something here about procreation, about the offspring, about the children who are born. We know that when children are born, they are such a wonderful blend of mother and father that they are a unique procreation of their parents and of God's heart. So Jesus is saying this bond, this relationship, this community which mirrors heaven is so important that if we break it off, then actually we're opening ourselves up to being unfaithful, which is not in God's heart, and to damaging the very fabric of what God is creating. And therefore Jesus is very serious about the reality of staying with partner, of staying true, of staying faithful. Except, he says, there is the exception for immorality. If there is adultery, if there is a breaking of that bond, a breaking of that covenant by one or the other with unfaithfulness to another, that's the only exception, Jesus says. And then then the disciples say, this is hard teaching. How can people actually stay together? And how can they not remarry once they've broken up? And Jesus says, well, actually, there are those who have made themselves eunuchs, that is, people who do not give themselves into fruitful relationships. There are eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. People are going without marriage for the sake of staying true to God in heaven. It is indeed a tough teaching, particularly in this day and age when marriage seems to be instant and dismissible and throwaway. But actually there's something in the marriage that Jesus is teaching here which reflects the heart and image of God who created us. let's seek in all our relationships to God and with one another to remain faithful and so reflect his image. Have a very good January 28th.